Hello there, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, you won't need to remember any names. You won't need to take notes or keep track of an emperor's rise and fall. There won't be any pop quizzes, just a long, quiet journey through one of the simplest and most universal parts of the human experience, drinking, but not in the modern world. Tonight, we'll pour our cups in a different time, in the bustling markets and dim taverns of ancient Rome. Because to drink in Rome wasn't just to unwind, it was to socialize, to celebrate, to show off, to observe rituals, to mark the passage of life's events, and sometimes simply to escape the relentless churn of the Roman day. Wine was everywhere, part of the religion, part of politics, part of medicine, part of misbehavior. They mixed it with honey, with herbs, even with seawater. They believed it could prevent illness or cause it. They judged you for how you drank, who you drank with, how strong your wine was, and even what time of day you sipped it. Some drank to toast the gods, others drank because there was nothing else clean enough to swallow, and still others drank in dark corners of the city, far from the gaze of polite society, surrounded by smoke, oil lamps, and muttered conversation. So tonight, we'll go slowly. We'll start at street level, at a dusty crossroads tavern near the edge of a Roman slum. Then we'll follow the trail of wine through soldiers' barracks, upper-class feasts, rural rituals, and all the strangeness in between. There won't be any shouting, no battle horns, no fire and fury, the murmur of distant conversation. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let your mind drift down the cobbled streets of ancient Ostia or into a candlelit triclinium in a Roman villa. You're not expected to stay awake. Imagine yourself walking the narrow back streets of Rome at dusk. The sun is low now, hovering just above the terracotta rooftops, casting long shadows between the buildings. The walls glow a dull orange in the fading light, their white plaster weathered by time, smoke, and rain. Laundry sways gently overhead, strung between balconies. You walk slowly, listening to the last sounds of the workday, the soft clink of tools being set down, the splash of water from a bucket, the muttered conversation of neighbors calling out to one another. You're tired, your feet ache. You've spent the day under the sun, perhaps working on a construction crew or loading grain at the docks. The air still carries the heat of the afternoon, but there's a slight breeze now, and with it comes the mingled smells of street-cooked lentils, olive oil, stale wine, and human sweat. You live in an insula, a crowded Roman apartment building. Your room is small, cramped, the kind of place where the noise of your neighbors seeps through the thin walls and the smell of someone else's dinner creeps beneath your door. Fires are always a risk here, and sometimes the water just stops flowing. But for now, you're not going home. Instead, your steps turn toward the popina. A popina is not elegant, it's not grand, but it's familiar, welcoming in its own dusty, chaotic way. The front is open to the street, with a heavy stone counter built into the wall, one of the features that gives these shops their distinctive appearance. Behind the counter, shelves hold rows of amphorae, large clay jars that store wine, sometimes marked with symbols or inscriptions to tell them apart. You recognize the woman behind the counter. She nods. You've been here before. The popina is small, maybe 2 or 3 tables, a few benches, low stools. Oil lamps flicker against the walls, giving everything a golden haze. The light is dim, the air thick with heat and the tang of spilled wine. Graffiti decorates the walls, some funny, some crude, some simply names of long-gone patrons scratched into the plaster. You take a seat. The bench creaks slightly beneath you. Beside you, 2 men are deep in conversation about a shipment of bricks that arrived late. In the corner, a group plays tali, the Roman version of knucklebones. They shake the pieces in small leather cups, roll them across the table and cheer or groan, depending on the result. One man, already glassy-eyed, tries to sing, and the others laugh, not unkindly. The wine, when it comes, is served in a clay cup, rough-edged, unadorned. It's cut with water, as always. Drinking undiluted wine was frowned upon in Roman society. They considered it uncultured, even dangerous. Only those viewed as barbarians, like the Celts or Thracians, drank it straight. A Roman watered his wine down. The ratio could vary, 2 parts water, 3 parts, sometimes more. In fact, to serve it too strong was seen as vulgar. Moderation was prized, at least in theory. This cup is sharp, slightly sour, likely mixed with resin to preserve it, maybe even stretched with chalk dust or herbs. A hint of bitterness lingers at the back of your throat. You sip it anyway, slowly, deliberately, not because it's good, but because it's yours, because it marks the end of the workday, because it gives you a seat, a cup, and a brief escape from the daily weight of being ordinary in the Roman world. Around you, the sounds of the tavern grow more rhythmic. The scrape of a stool on stone, the soft splash of wine being poured, the low murmur of voices, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. Someone mentions the races at the Circus Maximus. Another grumbles about taxes. A third boasts about a job hauling marble from the quarries outside the city. There's talk of the weather, of rumors, of lovers, of nothing at all. This was what the Popina offered. Not just wine, but company. Not celebration necessarily, but communion. For the poor and working classes of Rome, this was a space where one could speak freely, sit a while, and be among equals. It wasn't always clean. It wasn't always safe. Roman moralists frequently condemned these places, warning that they bred idleness, sedition, even crime. But the Popinae endured. They offered warmth on cold nights, noise when your own room was too quiet, and anonymity when you needed to disappear. You take another sip, let it linger. This wine won't change your fortunes. It won't cure the ache in your knees or wipe away the debt you still owe. But for now, it softens the world, makes the lamps flicker a little more gently, makes the voices around you feel like old songs you half remember. You glance toward the doorway. The night has fully settled in. Outside, a cart rattles past. Somewhere distant, a dog barks. And here, in the dim, uneven light, the Popina sways on its own quiet current, half alert, half dreaming. You'll head home soon, but not just yet. For a few more moments, you'll sit. Let the clay cup warm your hands. Let the day slide away. And feel, however briefly, like time is your own. Home. The evening is just beginning. You're in the domus of a senator, an elegant townhouse tucked behind a private atrium. The floors are mosaic, the walls painted in deep reds and ochres, adorned with scenes from myth. Orpheus with his lyre, Hercules wrestling the lion, Bacchus crowned with ivy, his goblet overflowing. Here wine is not poured from rough clay jugs, but from polished vessels of silver and bronze, and it is not drunk sitting upright but reclined on a cushioned couch in the dining room known as the triclinium. You take your place among the guests, 9, maybe 12 of you, each positioned according to status and familiarity. Slaves move gracefully between the couches, refilling cups, bringing trays of dried fruits, cheeses, olives steeped in brine. In the center, a table is set low, its surface glistening with dishes both savory and sweet. This is not a quick drink at the end of a workday. This is ritual, performance, and at the heart of it is the wine. As the evening unfolds, the host performs the libation, a ceremonial pouring of wine to the gods. A few drops spill onto the floor, an offering, a gesture of piety. Then the guests begin to drink. Always diluted, of course, this time perhaps 3 parts water to 1 part wine. The dilution is intentional, not only for health, but for conversation. Drunkenness at a banquet is accepted, in moderation. Conversation drifts easily, politics, philosophy, gossip, poetry. A guest recites a few lines from Horace about the fleeting nature of life. Another offers a witty retort. There is laughter, but it is practiced, polite. No one speaks too loudly. No one drinks too fast. The room is filled with soft sounds, the clink of metal cups, the gentle splash of wine being poured, the occasional bark of a dog from the courtyard beyond. A slave fans the air, stirring the scent of roasted figs and honey cakes. As the night deepens, the rules begin to relax. The second course is served, perhaps roast game, spiced and tender. More wine flows, faces grow red, voices louder. Someone tells a story about a dinner with the emperor, half remembered, half invented. Another claims his grandfather once drank a whole amphora without standing once. The boast earns a round of applause. But even here, excess is watched. The host employs a symposiarch, a kind of master of ceremonies for the evening's drinking. It is his job to regulate the flow of wine, to decide when the cups are filled and when they are not, to keep the balance between revelry and ruin. You glance around the room. Some guests recline lazily, eyes half closed. One murmurs a verse from Virgil. Another hums an old drinking song. A slave brings in a small harp and begins to pluck a melody, soft, steady, soothing. The triclinium has become something else now, not just a place to eat or drink, but a shared space of ideas, of theatre, of delicate social maneuvering. Who refills whose cup? Who laughs first? Who pretends not to notice when a guest's words slur or his cup tips a little too far? It's a dance, and it's all built around wine. You take another sip. This one's sweeter, touched with mulsum, a mix of wine and honey favored by many Roman elites. It glides easily across the tongue, warming the chest. Not sharp, not sour, just comfortable. The kind of drink that makes you forget what you were about to say and feel no rush to remember it. The banquet begins to wind down. Plates are cleared, candles burn lower. Some guests depart early, citing business at the forum or the journey home. Others linger. These last few moments are often the best. When the performances are done, the masks begin to slip, and quiet honesty can take root. Perhaps the host leans in, offers a private joke. Perhaps two guests trade glances that mean something more. Perhaps you close your eyes for just a moment and breathe. Outside, the city sleeps. But here, within these painted walls, time stretches. The wine, the conversation, the flickering light. They blend together into something softer than memory. You are not a senator, not a poet. But for tonight, in the corner of this great room, on a borrowed couch with a half-filled cup, you're part of something. And as your head grows heavy, and the last sip grows warm in your hand, you wonder if even the Romans, with all their rules and rituals, sometimes forgot the line between ceremony and comfort, between hosting and simply being. Far from the marble heart of Rome, the wine still flowed. It flowed at the borders, at the edges of the known world, in tents pitched beside frozen rivers or dry hills where strange stars lit the night sky. Roman soldiers, sent out to patrol the limits of empire, carried their rations, their weapons, and always their wine. Wine was a constant companion to the legionnaire, not a luxury, but a part of daily life. In fact, for many soldiers, wine was safer than water. Wells and streams could carry disease. But wine, especially diluted wine mixed with sour vinegar, known as posca, was seen as cleansing, restorative. And so, day after day, under the weight of armor and the burn of marching sun, soldiers drank. Imagine now the outskirts of a Roman camp. The sun is setting over a ridge of hills unfamiliar to you. Smoke curls upward from campfires. The clang of hammers and the murmured Latin of orders fades as the evening settles in. You, along with the other men in your century, sit cross-legged or squat on overturned shields. Your feet are sore, your muscles ache, but the pot of posca is passed around, and with it comes a kind of release. Posca was not refined. It was tart, almost sour, a mix of low-grade wine and vinegar, sometimes sweetened with herbs or honey if luck allowed. But it was comforting, even nourishing. And it had the added benefit of being seen as virtuous, stoic. The wealthy might drink honeyed mulsum or chilled Falernian from silver cups, but you, a soldier, took pride in this rougher blend. It marked you not as soft, but as disciplined, focused, Roman. At night, when guard shifts rotated and stars blinked into view, soldiers might talk over their cups. Not loudly, there was always the risk of reprimand, but enough to ease the silence. Stories of past campaigns, jokes traded between provinces, songs that began softly and often trailed off before the end. Wine did not erase homesickness or fear, but it made those feelings manageable, sharpened the edges of camaraderie, helped keep men tethered to one another in lands where nothing else felt familiar. And the wine itself was often local. As Rome expanded, it absorbed not just people and territories, but their agriculture. In Gaul, in Hispania, in Africa and the Greek East, vines flourished. Merchants followed the soldiers, selling wines of every quality. Amphorae, stamped with names and origins, moved along the same roads as boots and carts. A Roman soldier might drink Egyptian wine one month and Illyrian the next. This variety created new habits, new preferences. Some vintages grew reputations among units, others were laughed at and avoided. Certain commanders took pride in supplying decent wine to their men. Others were indifferent, but always in some form. It was there. Beyond nourishment, wine served as a reward. After a hard-fought victory or grueling march, a centurion might grant his men an extra measure. It might be mixed with honey or served undiluted for the rarest occasions. Such moments were brief but meaningful. A recognition of effort. A pause in the endless routine of drills, patrols, and watch. In winter quarters, wine played an even greater role. When campaigns paused and the days grew short and dark, soldiers huddled in their tents or wooden barracks. They patched their gear, carved small trinkets, recited poetry if they knew it. And they drank, carefully, quietly. But they drank, not to forget Rome, but to remember it. A taste of home in lands where the language was foreign and the customs strange. Sometimes, of course, it went too far. Discipline in the Roman army was strict, and drunkenness could lead to harsh punishment. Fines, whippings, worse. Officers were expected to lead by example, and excess drinking was a mark of poor character. But the line was not always clear. Wine could calm nerves, build trust, help ease the strain of harsh command. Even a general might share a cup with his men, rarely, but significantly. One famous example comes from the pen of Tacitus, who describes a moment during a mutiny when a commander quieted a seething legion not with threats, but with a shared drink. A simple cup of wine, offered without ceremony, was enough to reforge a bond that military protocol alone could not restore. And so from Germania to Britannia, from the burning sands of Numidia to the thick forests near the Danube, wine remained a presence. Poured at camp altars during religious rites, used to seal oaths, raised in toasts before battle, shared beside funeral pyres when comrades fell, it stitched itself into the rhythms of a soldier's life, steady and unquestioned. Picture now a solitary guard standing watch on a cold ridge, his cloak wrapped tight, the wind tugging at its edge. In his hand, a cup of warm posca, the steam rising into the night air. The camp lies quiet behind him. His eyes scan the dark horizon. He says nothing, but that cup, small as it is, offers a kind of peace. A pause. A private reminder of who he is, and the great stone city that sent him. Even at the edge of empire, Rome traveled in the cup. The story of Rome cannot be told without the vine. As the empire grew, so too did the footprint of the grape. It climbed hillsides, crossed borders, and took root in foreign soil, spreading not just as a crop, but as a symbol. Wine became the quiet ambassador of Rome, whispering its presence into the soil of conquered lands, blending Roman custom with local flavor until the two became inseparable. In the early Republic, Roman wine was modest. Imported Greek wines were still considered superior, and many Roman farmers grew grain and olives before they considered grapes. But as the city's wealth increased, so did its thirst. Viticulture expanded first in the Italian countryside across Latium, Etruria, and Campania. Hillsides once used for pasture were reshaped with terraces, vines carefully trained and pruned, the land transformed to serve a single purpose, to yield grapes fit for pressing. As the demand grew, so did production. Amphorae, those tall clay jars with pointed bases, became common currency in the movement of wine. Sealed with resin, stamped with merchant marks, they moved by mule, cart, and river barge. Ports like Ostia bustled with shipments from southern Italy, Sicily, and the islands beyond. By the 1st century BCE, Roman wine was not only dominant within the city, it was being exported abroad. With each new conquest, vineyards followed. Roman generals, rewarded with plots of land, often chose to plant grapes. Soldiers retiring from decades of service settled in foreign provinces and brought vines with them. Colonists in Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa built farms in the Roman style, complete with stone presses and fermentation vats. The grape took hold in all climates, from the foggy river valleys of the Rhine to the sunburned slopes of Judea. But wine was never just transplanted, it adapted. In Gaul, the Celts had long brewed ale and mead, but wine was new. At first, they imported it in bulk, trading salt, hides and slaves for the Roman beverage. Amphorae from Italy have been found deep in Celtic territory, sometimes buried with noble dead. The drink was exotic, a mark of power, even magic. Over time, however, the Gauls began to plant their own vineyards. What had been a foreign luxury became a local tradition, shaped by the land and its people. In Hispania, the fertile plains and temperate climate proved ideal for wine. Roman settlers planted vast estates, and Spanish wines quickly earned a reputation for strength and character. Pliny the Elder would later describe wines from Tarraconensis and Baetica with admiration. By the 1st century CE, Hispania was exporting wine back to Rome itself, a reversal of influence, a sign that the vine had not only spread, but taken root with confidence. Even in North Africa, where water was scarce and the heat relentless, vines grew. Roman engineers built irrigation channels and terraced hillsides. They shaded the roots and harvested at dawn. The wines of Carthage, once Rome's bitter enemy, became part of the empire's daily life. Here too, amphorae moved inland up the Nile and deep into desert trading posts, always carrying the scent of Roman cultivation. But the spread of wine culture was not just agricultural, it was cultural. To drink wine the Roman way meant more than choosing a grape. It meant following customs, mixing it with water, pouring libations before sipping, using it to seal business deals or calm heated arguments. It meant adopting not just the beverage, but the behaviors that surrounded it. In this way, the vine became an instrument of soft conquest. One did not need a legion to enforce Roman manners if wine could do it more gently. Roman authors noticed. Seneca, writing from exile in Corsica, described how quickly local tribes took to Roman wine customs. He saw in it a kind of erosion, a blending of identities that comforted as much as it erased. To drink like a Roman was to speak, act, and eventually think like one. In some places, the blend was harmonious. Roman-style banquets were held with local music. Local gods received wine poured from Roman cups. Temples built in hybrid styles rose over old shrines, new gods drinking from old altars. In other regions, tension brewed. Some leaders rejected Roman wine customs, seeing them as an invasion. Others embraced them too eagerly, drawing criticism from their own people. Wine could unite, but it could also divide. Still, the pattern continued. Vines stretched outward like quiet veins of empire, rooting Roman presence into the very terrain. Even as military borders shifted and politics frayed, the vineyards remained. Farmers passed them on, Merchants shipped their yield, and across the empire, from smoky taverns to marble banquet halls, the same ritual endured. A hand lifted a cup, a small libation poured, a sip taken, and the silence that followed, filled with meaning. Today, when we think of wine regions in Europe, the hills of France, the valleys of Spain, the sunlit slopes of Portugal, we are often tracing the shadows of Roman vines. The amphorae are long gone, the presses rebuilt 1,000 times, but the paths laid by Rome remain, hidden in the soil, in the roots, in the rhythms of the harvest. In this way, the empire never truly vanished. It lingers in the land, in the glass, and with each sip, perhaps without knowing, we taste history. The Roman popina, those humble wine shops scattered throughout the city, held a complicated place in the public imagination. For many citizens, the popina was familiar and necessary, a place of warmth, familiarity, and routine. But for the elite, the lawmakers, and the moral guardians of Rome, these taverns were viewed with deep suspicion. Unruly spaces where discipline dissolved, and Rome's tightly wound social fabric began to fray. Imagine the outer districts of the city as dusk approaches. The streets are narrower here. The buildings lean inward as though whispering to each other. Laundry sways gently overhead, and near the end of a dim side alley, a flickering oil lamp marks the entrance to a popina. Its small hearth is already glowing, its simple menu etched in faded letters above the door. Lentils, cheese, olives, wine. Step inside and you'll see nothing extraordinary. A few low tables, a handful of stools, shelves lined with clay amphorae. Patrons from the lower classes, laborers, freedmen, traders, lean over their drinks, speaking in low tones. The air smells of warm bread, wood smoke, and the faint sourness of cheap wine. The sound of dice clacking against stone rises from a corner table where two men gamble with worn coins. A woman serves from behind the counter, moving with the ease of habit, refilling cups, collecting bowls. To the outsider, it seems peaceful, mundane even. But to the Roman Senate, to the censors charged with maintaining public virtue, places like this were dangerous. The popina was not just a tavern. It was an uncontrolled space, a space where people of different classes and backgrounds mixed more freely than in the forum or the temple. It was a place where speech was looser, where jokes turned political, where news was traded with rumor, and frustrations found voice after 2 or 3 cups of sour wine. In the minds of moralists, it was a breeding ground for dissent. Some even believed that the very nature of wine contributed to this tension. Wine, after all, altered the mind. It loosened the tongue. It made men bold who were usually quiet, and loud who were usually careful. It disturbed the Roman ideal of temperance, of self-mastery and restraint. Writers like Seneca, Cicero, and Juvenal often mocked or condemned excessive drinking. They warned of its influence on judgment, on public order, on Roman dignity. The moralists wrote of men who wasted their inheritance in wine shops, of women who slipped into back alleys after dark, of debates lost not in the forum, but over dice and drink. And yet, despite all this disapproval, the popinae endured. They were cheap, accessible, familiar. For many Romans, especially those who had no formal dining room, no atrium, no household slaves to serve meals, the popina offered a place to simply sit and eat, to drink among others, to belong. There were even those who defended the popina, not openly, perhaps, but quietly. They pointed out that not everyone could recline at banquets, that not everyone had access to silver cups and watered mulsum. For the common man, a clay mug of wine, shared with a friend at the end of the day, was not debauchery. It was routine. It was peace. Some scholars believe the disdain for the popina was rooted less in morality than in control. The Roman elite, deeply hierarchical in their thinking, feared any space where social lines blurred. In the popina, a freedman could share a table with a citizen. A former soldier could trade stories with a cloth merchant. A woman might sit beside a man without a formal escort. The space, though small, was fluid. And in that fluidity, the elite saw a kind of quiet rebellion. The popina was also one of the few places where slaves could sometimes interact with their own money, their own time. Some slaves, allowed to work for wages on the side, saved enough to purchase cheap wine or gamble for small stakes. The popina offered a brief illusion of freedom, and perhaps that illusion was its most subversive feature of all. Yet even among the wealthy, hypocrisy stirred beneath the surface. There were patricians who visited the popina in disguise, who drank behind closed shutters, seeking the rough honesty of its patrons, the freedom of its shadows. Writers who condemned drunkenness in their prose sometimes praised Bacchus in their poetry. Senators who passed laws against disorder were later found slumped at elite banquets, red-faced asleep in their tunics. The truth was complicated. It always is. So when you picture a Roman tavern, do not imagine only the grime, the cracked walls, the muttered deals over stale wine. Picture also the laughter, the quiet, the lean forward of one friend toward another, the slow pour of wine in a chipped cup, still warm from the fire, the way even tired men smiled, even when the day had not been kind. There is something deeply human in these places, something stubborn. In every city, in every time, there have been corners like these, where the rules bend slightly and people gather not to be grand, but simply to be. In the end, the popina was not a challenge to Rome. It was a mirror, one the elite preferred not to look into, but one that, quietly, night after night, reflected the true shape of the Roman soul. In Roman society, wine held many meanings. It was nourishment and symbol. It marked festivals and framed the day. And yet, for Roman women, the question of wine was not simply one of taste. It was one of status, morality, and suspicion. A cup in the wrong hands could be seen as innocent refreshment or dangerous rebellion. Imagine a quiet Roman courtyard garden, shaded by olive trees and bordered with low, flowering shrubs. A woman reclines beneath a painted portico. The air is still. Bees murmur softly near the herbs. She holds a cup in her hand and she sips, slowly, discreetly, from a mixture of wine and water, flavored faintly with honey and fennel. The gesture is modest, controlled, almost ritual, but this peaceful moment would not have always been permitted. In the early Republic, Roman women, especially those from high-status households, were forbidden from drinking wine at all. It was not just frowned upon, it was criminal. The law treated wine for women as a kind of moral toxin, an invitation to deception, disobedience, even infidelity. Writers of the time speak of women being punished harshly for drinking, even beaten by their husbands or male relatives if they were caught. One oft-repeated tale from the historian Valerius Maximus recounts a Roman man who killed his wife with a blow for drinking wine. When brought to trial, he was acquitted, on the grounds that the law permitted such action to uphold virtue. It is a story told with little apology. The fear was not simply that women might drink to excess. It was that wine loosened boundaries, that it opened the door to behavior considered un-Roman. Public laughter, conversation with strangers, disobedience to the rigid expectations of modesty and silence. Wine made the mind wander, they believed, and where the mind wandered, so too might the body. But over time, the laws changed. By the late Republic and into the Empire, women, particularly those of the upper classes, drank openly at banquets and religious ceremonies. They served wine to guests, they toasted the gods, and they shared cups with their husbands in the triclinium. Still, suspicion lingered. There remained an invisible threshold, a sense that too much wine, too visible a sip, too ready a laugh could shift perception. A woman who drank properly was elegant, cultured, social. A woman who drank too much, or too publicly, was decadent, lascivious, dangerous. It was a fine line, one navigated with care. And yet, Roman women found their own spaces within the culture of wine. In religious rites, especially those led by women, wine played a central role. The Vestal Virgins, Rome's sacred priestesses, were believed to abstain from wine, but other female-led cults embraced it. In the mysteries of Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, and Liber, a rural version of Bacchus, women shared wine as part of their rituals. Here the drink was not a threat to purity. It was a symbol of renewal, fertility, and connection to the earth. In domestic life, too, wine was common. Women managed the household stores. They oversaw the pouring of libations at the family altar. They prepared mixtures for the sick, for the guests, for the gods. A wife might know exactly how much her husband preferred diluted, what herbs he liked added, what amphora to draw from depending on the guest. Wine was not just poured, it was curated. And for many women, particularly widows or those in trade, wine was business. Female tavern keepers were not unusual in Rome. Known as coponi, they ran inns and wine shops in the city's back streets. Some were freed women, others were former slaves. Some were born into the trade. They sold wine, served food, offered rooms to travelers. They dealt with drunk patrons, collected debts, managed staff. In these spaces, wine was not philosophy, it was livelihood. Of course, Roman satire did little to protect these women's reputations. Writers like Juvenal and Martial often conflated female innkeepers with prostitution, mocking them as corrupt and lascivious. But behind the sneers, there was power. These women operated independently in a society that left few paths for female autonomy. There were also those who drank in private, quietly, without fanfare, in gardens, in corners of the atrium, behind shaded curtains during the long summer heat. These were not scandalous moments, they were human ones. To sip from a cup, to feel the bitterness or sweetness of the wine settle on the tongue, to sigh at the end of a long afternoon. It was not about rebellion or excess. It was about being alive. The truth, as always, was more complex than the law allowed. Yes, Roman society placed limits on women. It judged their behavior. It watched their hands when they reached for a cup. But inside those boundaries, women still lived. They drank at weddings and funerals. They toasted the gods. They found joy in the rhythm of a shared meal, in the hush of evening, in the cool relief of a watered wine beneath the vines. And so, when you picture a Roman woman with a cup in hand, do not picture scandal. Do not imagine only the judgments of senators or poets. Picture instead a moment of stillness, a garden shadow, a gesture that is centuries old, a woman sipping from a vessel shaped by someone else's hands. The wine inside, sharp, sweet, or warm with spice, carrying memory, comfort, or simply the taste of something her own. Even beneath the weight of law and custom, the cup still passed from hand to hand. And sometimes that was enough. Before the wine ever touched the lips, before its warmth traveled down the throat or its flavor lingered on the tongue, it passed through the hands, through the tools and rituals and artistry of the Roman world. Because wine in Rome wasn't only about what you drank, it was about how you drank it, and with what. The Roman drinking vessel was not just a cup, it was a signal of status, of style, of intention. Rich or poor, noble or merchant, each drinker held something that told a story about who they were and what they valued. In the humblest populi, wine was served in rough clay mugs, often unglazed, sometimes chipped, their texture gritty from years of use. These vessels were utilitarian, made to be handled without ceremony. They were stacked on wooden shelves, rinsed hastily between uses, and sometimes tossed when cracked beyond repair. In these taverns, the cup mattered less than the content. It was the warmth of the wine and the comfort of the space that people came for, not elegance. But elsewhere, the cup became something more. In elite households, vessels ranged from simple terracotta to exquisitely crafted silver. The skyphos, a deep, straight-sided drinking cup, was common. The cantharos, with its high handles and deep bowl, evoked Dionysian imagery, often used in ritual or banquet contexts. And the calyx, shallower and more open, lent itself to toasts and conversation. Each shape carried meaning, rooted in Greek tradition and Roman adaptation. Some cups were painted, Scenes of myth, Bacchus in revelry, satyrs chasing nymphs, vines curling in rhythmic patterns wrapped around the curve of the vessel. Others bore inscriptions, toasts, riddles, brief poems. A guest might lift a cup and read in faded script, Bibe felicita, drink happily, or Nunc est bibendum, now is the time for drinking. For wealthier Romans, the material itself became a statement. Cups made of silver or bronze, carefully balanced, sometimes inlaid with semi-precious stones. Glassware too became popular, especially as Roman techniques in glass blowing advanced. Transparent green-blue vessels caught the candlelight beautifully, casting soft reflections on banquet tables and making each pour a quiet spectacle. And then there were the mixing bowls, the craters. In Rome, wine was never poured straight from the storage amphora into a drinking cup. It was first diluted, traditionally with water, in a central vessel. The crater stood at the heart of the gathering, often large and decorated, a kind of altar to the evening's unfolding. From it, servants ladled wine into smaller jugs, then into cups. The ratio of wine to water was determined by the symposiarch, the evening's master of drink. Too strong and guests risked drunkenness, too weak and the celebration dulled. The pouring itself was part of the rhythm, quiet, measured, a ladle dipped, the soft splash of wine into the cup. Sometimes a drop spilled, whether accidentally or as a libation to the gods. The ritual mattered. It signaled care, attention, respect for both the drink and the drinker. Even the amphorae that stored the wine held meaning. Tall, two-handled, narrow-necked vessels, they were sealed with pitch or wax to keep their contents fresh. Many were marked with names of the vintner, the region, the vintage. Some bore stamps from imperial estates, confirming the wine's origin in the fields of the emperor himself. A servant might present an amphora with a quiet murmur, Falernian from the last harvest of Baiae. And with that, the wine became not just liquid, but story. Among the lower classes, the materials were simpler but still expressive. Wooden cups, shells used in coastal villages, reused containers, sometimes carried by hand from street vendors and poured in alleys, markets, or along the Tiber's edge. Even here, there was choice. Even here, there was ritual, a pause before sipping, a glance toward the sky, a moment shared. In funerary contexts, the drinking vessel took on even deeper meaning. Cups were buried with the dead, sometimes full, sometimes empty, sometimes accompanied by a small jar of wine to nourish the spirit in the next world. The cup became a symbol of continuity, of offering, of passage. And then there were the toasts. When Romans raised their cups, it was more than celebration. It was acknowledgement to the health of the host, to the glory of the gods, to the memory of the fallen. The phrase, bene tibi, to your well-being, might be whispered, or simply, prosit, may it benefit you. The act of raising a cup slowed time. It brought the room into rhythm. It asked for a pause, for intention, and whether the vessel was made of clay or silver, held by a senator or a slave, the gesture was the same. A hand lifts, a cup tilts, the wine flows. There is something universal in that motion, something that has survived the centuries, even as empires fell and languages changed. Even now, when we raise a glass, whether to celebrate or to remember, whether alone or among friends, we echo that same quiet gesture, that same ancient reverence, because drinking in Rome was never just about the wine. It was about the moment, the object, the hand that held the cup and the meaning poured into it. And when we sip slowly, deliberately, we sip with them. In religious rites, especially those led by women, wine played a central role. The Vestal Virgins, Rome's sacred priestesses, were believed to abstain from wine, but other female-led cults embraced it. In the mysteries of Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, and Liber, a rural version of Bacchus, women shared wine as part of their rituals. Here the drink was not a threat to purity, It was a symbol of renewal, fertility, and connection to the earth. In domestic life, too, wine was common. Women managed the household stores. They oversaw the pouring of libations at the family altar. They prepared mixtures for the sick, for the guests, for the gods. A wife might know exactly how much her husband preferred diluted, what herbs he liked added, what amphora to draw from depending on the guest. Wine was not just poured, it was curated. And for many women, particularly widows or those in trade, wine was business. Female tavern keepers were not unusual in Rome. Known as coponi, they ran inns and wine shops in the city's back streets. Some were freed women, others were former slaves. Some were born into the trade. They sold wine, served food, offered rooms to travelers. They dealt with drunk patrons, collected debts, managed staff. In these spaces, wine was not philosophy, it was livelihood. Of course, Roman satire did little to protect these women's reputations. Writers like Juvenal and Martial often conflated female innkeepers with prostitution, mocking them as corrupt and lascivious. But behind the sneers, there was power. These women operated independently in a society that left few paths for female autonomy. There were also those who drank in private, quietly, without fanfare, in gardens, in corners of the atrium, behind shaded curtains during the long summer heat. These were not scandalous moments, they were human ones. To sip from a cup, to feel the bitterness or sweetness of the wine settle on the tongue, to sigh at the end of a long afternoon. It was not about rebellion or excess. It was about being alive. The truth, as always, was more complex than the law allowed. Yes, Roman society placed limits on women. It judged their behavior. It watched their hands when they reached for a cup. But inside those boundaries, women still lived. A woman sipping from a vessel shaped by someone else's hands. The wine inside, sharp, sweet, or warm with spice, carrying memory, comfort, or simply the taste of something her own. Even beneath the weight of law and custom, the cup still passed from hand to hand. And sometimes that was enough. Wine played a vital role in this holiday. It was poured freely, often early in the day, as citizens gathered for meals, poetry readings, gambling, and song. For some, the Saturnalia was the only time all year when inhibitions could be truly dropped. When they could speak more openly, relax their posture, smile without calculation. The wine didn't just loosen tongues, it softened the strict edges of Roman society. Even the streets changed. Torches were hung outside doorways. Evergreen garlands draped across balconies. The bustle of normal life slowed into a different rhythm, a festival rhythm. You could hear it in the way feet moved, the pace of conversation, the sound of corks gently popping from sealed amphorae. Children played dice games, old men reminisced. Women laughed more loudly than usual. Songs, some sacred and others absurd, were sung in courtyards. And everywhere wine passed from hand to hand, each cup a reminder of joy, abundance, and the brief, precious freedom that came with it. Of course, not every Roman embraced these holidays. There were always those who sneered at the Saturnalia's excess, who judged the loosened behavior, the relaxed roles. But for the many who welcomed it, the festival offered not chaos, but renewal. A reminder that laughter was part of the human experience. That not all days need be hard, that even gods smiled. Smaller festivals echoed this pattern throughout the year. The Compitalia, the Consualia, the Liberalia, each with its rituals, each with its drink. And within every home, family traditions added to the rhythm. A birthday feast, a wedding toast, a reunion over bread and wine after a long journey. And in every celebration, the wine was there, carried in amphorae, sipped from rough cups or polished silver, shared between old friends and strangers, offered to the gods with bowed heads or lifted high with a loud and laughing prosit. These were not just festivals of the vine. They were festivals of life. And in the soft golden haze of a Roman afternoon, with garlands swaying and clay cups warm in hand, it was easy to forget the burdens of empire and ambition. In these moments, beneath the painted skies and the sound of distant flutes, even the most hardened Roman might pause and remember what it felt like simply to be part of the world. To sip slowly, to laugh gently, to give thanks for the harvest, for the wine, for the time they still had, because wine in its way marked time, and time, for all its power, always flowed best when shared. To the Romans, wine was more than celebration, more than social glue or sacred symbol. It was also medicine. In an age where doctors worked without microscopes, where fevers came without names, and where suffering was a constant hum in the background of life, wine offered a small measure of comfort and sometimes a belief in healing. Roman medicine was a blend of observation, tradition, and guesswork. Physicians studied the body through dissection, philosophy, and careful watching. They looked to Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and Galen. They believed in humors, 4 fluids inside the body whose balance determined health. And into this system, wine fit neatly, like a liquid tool for restoring equilibrium. Imagine a Roman household on a quiet, windless afternoon. A child lies in bed, flushed and sweating. His mother paces beside him, while a physician unrolls a small pouch of herbs. He leans in, sniffs the child's breath, touches his pulse. Then, gently, he calls for a measure of wine, but not to drink. Not yet. First the wine is warmed, then it's mixed with crushed myrrh, or perhaps with cinnamon or ground thyme. The doctor stirs it slowly, murmuring that this mixture will open the passages, or cool the bile. The spoon touches the child's lips, and the slow ritual of Roman healing begins. Wine was used for many ailments, mixed with honey to soothe sore throats, infused with garlic to treat intestinal worms, served cold and diluted to calm a fever. Astringent red wines were used to clean wounds, lighter white wines to cleanse the palate. For the Roman physician, each vintage had a temperament, a personality. Some wines were hot and dry, others cold and moist. The key was matching the wine to the person, to the season, and to the illness. The philosopher and Dr. Galen wrote extensively about medicinal wines. In his texts, we find lists of uses: wine with saffron to ease melancholy, wine with rue to relieve gas, wine with wormwood to purge the stomach. There were wines for sleep, wines for clarity, wines to restore appetite or reduce swelling. Some were made in great amphorae and sold in markets. Others were concocted by hand in kitchens and bathhouses. But the most common use of wine in Roman healing was comfort, the kind of comfort that does not cure but soothes. For the aging man with aching joints, a cup at night took the edge off the pain. For the woman in childbirth, wine dulled the fear, slowed the breath. For the soldier nursing a wound by firelight, a swallow of warmed red wine dulled the edge of the blade's memory. In a world with no anesthetics, no antibiotics, no clear path through most illness, wine gave the illusion, sometimes the reality, of a moment's peace. Even in death, wine played a role. A dying person might be given wine, not to save them, but to ease their passing, sweetened, warmed, flavored with herbs. The bitterness of the world softened with a final sip. Friends gathered nearby might pour libations onto the ground, onto the hearth, onto the skin of the earth, hoping the gods would see, would notice, would guide gently. In some graves, archaeologists have found cups still stained with wine. Small clay flasks sealed tight, perhaps meant for the journey, perhaps just a gesture of love. Here in case you're thirsty. And in hospitals, if such a word can be used, wine was used to clean as well as to calm. Roman military camps often had small infirmaries. Their doctors, called medici, carried wine in their kits, alongside bronze tools and linen bandages. It was used to rinse wounds, to sterilize blades, to mix with bitter medicines and make them drinkable. Wine was not the cure, but it was often the companion of one. At the baths, another kind of healing unfolded. After the hot steam and the scrub of pumice stones, patrons would recline and drink lightly diluted wine to restore their strength. Not to excess, just enough to feel balance return. The warm water, the warm wine, the silence between them. This was wellness. Roman style. And for those who could not afford doctors or healers, wine remained the medicine of the poor. A cup at day's end to quiet the shaking hands, to slow the heart, to soften the memory of a loss. It was not prescribed, it was not explained, but it was known. Even in Roman literature, the link between wine and healing appears again and again. Poets wrote of wine as a balm for heartbreak, as a cure for sleeplessness, as the only answer to the questions that haunted men in the long hours of the night. In one verse, a widow pours herself a cup of wine and speaks to the shadows. In another, an old man sits at the edge of a field, the sun on his back, sipping from a small flask to warm his bones. Wine filled the cracks that medicine could not reach, and in doing so, it became its own kind of remedy. So when we think of Roman medicine, we must not imagine only herbs and charts and long scrolls of theory. We must also see the cup, the pour, the hand that steadies itself before the sip. Wine was not always the answer, but it was, more often than not, the thing that got them through to the next morning. And in the end, that too is healing. In the ancient world, time moved differently. Days were counted by the position of the sun, the length of a shadow, the call of a street vendor, or the clatter of hooves along a worn stone road. And yet, in the slow passage of seasons, one thing the Romans trusted to the rhythm of time was wine. Wine, like people, changed with age. It deepened, softened, lost some of its youthful bite and gained a kind of wisdom. And so the life of a Roman vintage, its birth, its storage, its quiet waiting, became a story of patience. Imagine a Roman vineyard in the late days of autumn. The grape harvest is complete. The vines rest, their leaves brittle and red. In the farmhouses nearby, amphorae, some fresh, others already sealed, line the walls. Some will be opened soon, served at feasts or in taverns. Others, though, will wait. Waiting is everything in the aging of wine. Once the grapes had been crushed and fermented, once the skins and stems had been strained away, the wine was poured into large clay vessels, often lined with resin or wax to prevent spoilage. These amphorae, tall and elegant in form, were then sealed with pitch, wax, or a clay stopper and placed in storage. Sometimes the storage was simple, a shaded corner of the villa, a cool room beneath the house, a cellar carved into a hillside. In larger estates, dedicated wine vaults were built, low, quiet spaces where the air stayed dry and the temperature steady. And then, time did its work. For many Romans, wine was not meant to be aged. It was made to be consumed, often within a year or two of production. These younger wines were sharp, lively, often rough around the edges. They stung the tongue. They carried the scent of the field and the smoke of the fermenting fire. But some vintages, some years, some barrels were chosen to rest. The most famous of these aged wines came from the region of Falernum, in the hills between Rome and Campania. Grown on sun-drenched slopes with volcanic soil, Falernian wine was thick, strong, and high in alcohol. It could age for decades. It was said that a proper Falernian wine should be 15 years old before reaching its peak. Some amphorae were marked with the consular year, the names of the magistrates in office when it was sealed, an early form of vintage dating. To open such a wine was an event. Picture a Roman banquet years after the harvest. The host, an older man, respected and careful, gives the nod. A servant descends into the cellar and returns, dusty and slow, with an amphora that smells faintly of age and earth. The seal is broken. A thin thread of white vapor escapes from the mouth of the vessel. The first pour is dark, almost syrupy. It clings to the cup, its scent full and warm. This wine is not lively. It is not playful. It is serious. It carries the memory of the year it came from. The weather, the soil, the hands that picked the grapes, and the guests know it. They sip slowly, aware of time, aware of what's been kept and what's been lost. In aging wine, the Romans saw a metaphor for life itself. They believed that the best things took time, that patience was not just a virtue, but a reward in waiting. That a life like a vintage became richer not despite the years, but because of them. And so wine cellars were not just places of storage. They were places of promise. Of course, not every aged wine was good. Some spoiled, some soured. Amphorae leaked, seals cracked. Mice burrowed into storerooms, but even this was accepted. Not every barrel could last. Not every bottle reached its full bloom. There was wisdom in that too. Some Romans took pride in their personal wine stores. Wealthy landowners kept lists. They hired specialists to care for their stocks. They compared notes with friends, traded barrels across estates, bragged of years when the weather had blessed their vines. It became a quiet competition. Who could wait the longest, who could pour the oldest, who could serve a guest something touched by time and memory. And just as wine was stored and counted, so too were people. The aged Roman, if fortunate, was revered. The silver hair, the slow step, the voice lined with gravel. They were not seen as past their use, but as carrying the weight of years, the richness of perspective. Like wine, they had endured fermentation, transformation, and they were all the more treasured for it. It is comforting to think of wine in this way, not only as a drink, but as a witness. It waits in the dark, quietly changing, holding on to the essence of summer, even in the depths of winter. And when at last it is opened, it gives. Not just flavor, but story. So when the Romans raised a cup of well-aged wine, they did not simply taste grapes and clay and time. They tasted the patience of storage, the quiet of cellars, the hope of vintners, the wisdom of years, and perhaps they tasted something of themselves. Because to age a thing well, to care for it, to wait for it, to open it when the time is right, is not just an act of cultivation. It is an act of love. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of history. Empires rise and fall, roads disappear, names are forgotten, but some things endure. Small, unassuming things. The curve of a cup, the imprint of a vine's root, a stain of red in the porous clay of a broken amphora. And through these echoes, the story of Roman wine continues to be told. Beneath layers of ash, stone, and soil, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of fragments tied to Rome's ancient wine culture. Amphorae, once tossed aside or buried as trash, now sit in museum cases. Wine presses, carved from stone and anchored into forgotten courtyards, have been unearthed in farmsteads across Italy, Gaul, and North Africa. Even the faint traces of grape pollen, trapped for centuries in the sediment of riverbeds and wells, offer quiet proof of vines once carefully tended. Step carefully into the ruins of a Roman villa, somewhere along the coast of the Bay of Naples. The walls are faded, their frescoes chipped by time. But in the corner of the peristyle garden stands a raised stone basin, and beside it, what at first appears to be an ordinary bench, but a closer look reveals a channel cut into the stone, sloped to drain. A pressing floor. Here grapes were crushed beneath bare feet or heavy weights. Their juices flowed into jars, their skins left to dry in the sun. The wine was not just consumed here, it was created. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, entire winemaking facilities have been found intact beneath volcanic ash. Clay vessels still stacked in rows, wooden barrels petrified into shape. Mural paintings that depict scenes of grape harvests, Bacchic feasts, and countryside altars. One fresco shows a satyr and a maiden dancing with a wineskin between them, their bodies loose and laughing. Another shows Dionysus cradling a cluster of grapes like a newborn child. Even the streets of Rome hold their remnants. In the ancient harbor of Ostia, archaeologists have uncovered wine warehouses, horea vinaria, built for the storage and trade of vast quantities of wine. Amphorae, labeled with origin stamps. Graffiti scrawled onto storage walls, names, tallies, dates. One scratch message reads simply, "This jar is mine. Touch it and you'll wish you hadn't." A small note from a man whose cargo in his eyes was treasure. Each of these fragments tells a story. In the soil of Provence, thousands of pieces of Italian amphorae have been found. evidence of Roman wine trade routes that stretched across the Mediterranean. In Britain, near Hadrian's Wall, sherds of imported wine jars lie among the remnants of barracks and soldier camps. Wine, it seems, traveled wherever Romans went, even to the coldest edges of their world. In Spain, particularly in the fertile valley of the Guadalquivir, entire estates devoted to wine production have been unearthed. Roman presses, vats, and tools, all carefully arranged in complexes, once worked by dozens of hands. Inscriptions found nearby describe imperial ownership, land held not by private farmers, but by the emperor himself. These weren't just vineyards, they were engines of commerce, and the wine they produced, aged in amphorae, marked with official stamps, flowed all the way back to Rome. Sometimes the past reveals itself more subtly. In a dry cave in the Judean hills, archaeologists discovered the remains of an amphora buried with care. Inside, still faintly visible under UV light, was a residue, a reddish-black shadow of a liquid once held there. Tests confirmed it. Wine, preserved by dryness and time, holding the ghost of its presence nearly 2,000 years later. In the Roman catacombs, carved into the soft volcanic tufa outside the city, wine makes its quiet appearance in early Christian iconography. On the walls, painted in ochre and charcoal, the cup of communion, the grapes of the harvest, the flowing vines that connect earth to heaven. Even as empires changed, even as gods shifted names, the imagery of wine endured, transformed, but still recognized. And then there are the ships, sunken Roman merchant vessels, found at the bottom of the sea, still filled with their cargo. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of amphorae stacked like honeycomb in the hull, each one once brimming with wine. Some were headed for Gaul, others for Egypt or Crete. Their journeys ended beneath the waves, but their purpose remains visible even now. These ships did not carry gold. They carried memory, fermented, sealed, and trusted to the sea. There is a quiet romance in these discoveries. To touch a cup that once sat on a Roman table, to lift an amphora from beneath the silt and see, still legible, the brushstrokes of a maker's mark. To know that this jar traveled further than many men of its time, that it passed through markets and hands, was poured and refilled, and finally forgotten until now. And it is through these objects, these fragments, these echoes in the soil, that we begin to understand the true scope of wine in the Roman world. Not only in poetry or politics, but in the daily life of people whose names we'll never know, who drank beneath the same moon, who waited for harvests, who raised their cups in sorrow, in celebration, in silence. They left behind no monuments, but they left behind stains on clay, on stone, on time itself. And as we walk slowly through the ruins, through the fields, through the gentle hush of excavated memory, we are reminded that the story of Rome is not just written in marble and war, it is written too in wine, where time was measured in ink, not hours. The streets are quiet now. The baths are behind you. You step through a tall wooden doorway and enter a different kind of stillness. This is not a temple, not a market, not a place of performance or politics. This is a private Roman library, a chamber set aside in a well-appointed home, reserved for silence and thought. Imagine a long, narrow room. The walls are lined with wooden cabinets, armaria with neat rows of scrolls tucked away in bundles, each one labeled with careful handwriting. The air is dry and faintly musty, tinged with the scent of aged papyrus and beeswax polish. Light streams in from a high window, filtered through a curtain of woven linen. The shadows are soft. There is no fire burning here, only oil lamps and quiet. You sit on a low stool beside a table. Upon it rest 2 scrolls, a stylus, and a bronze inkwell. A slave stands nearby, an admonitor or reading assistant, ready to recite the passage aloud or to fetch another text should you wish it. The scroll in your hand is not a casual object. It has been copied by skilled scribes, each letter brushed with deliberate care. Mistakes are scraped away with the edge of a knife. No ink blots, no haste. You unroll it slowly. The text reveals itself in graceful Latin. Perhaps it is Virgil's Aeneid or Cicero's Essays. Perhaps it is medical knowledge from Hippocrates or star maps and theories of the heavens by Ptolemy. Reading is not rushed. You trace each line with your eyes, absorbing the rhythm of the prose like a song. There is no punctuation, no paragraph, breaks. It is an art to find the meaning in the flow. For a Roman of means, the private library is a symbol, not just of wealth, but of virtue. To own scrolls is to cultivate the self. To spend time among them is to elevate the soul, but not all who enter here are elites. A learned freedman might serve as librarian. A Greek tutor may guide the household's children in philosophy and rhetoric. Knowledge moves in quiet circles, passed hand to hand like a gentle flame. The furniture is simple. A low couch in one corner, a lectern for longer readings. Shelves hold wax tablets and scroll cases of red-dyed leather. In one niche, a small bust, perhaps of Socrates or Seneca, reminds the reader that wisdom often comes with age, and often without certainty. You look up. The silence hums around you. Somewhere outside, a bell rings in the street. But here, time passes differently. You may spend an hour or several. There is no reason to rush. The past waits patiently in every scroll. And this room, this quiet room, is a sanctuary not from noise, but from forgetting. Because while emperors pass, and tenements burn and temples fall, the words endure. Now close the scroll gently. Place it back into its case. Rise slowly. The lamps flicker. Your footsteps are the only sound. You step out once more into the corridor, and when you're ready, we'll descend into the final hours of the day. Not into books or baths, but into something older, earthier. Let us walk into a Roman tavern. Where even the smallest homes held the sacred, you've returned. The streets are empty now. Rome is quiet, more quiet than it ever seems in daylight. Your steps echo faintly on the stone as you push open the door to your insula. It creaks as it always does. Inside, the air is cool and still. The walls absorb the silence. You don't light the lamp immediately. You let your eyes adjust. The outlines of your humble room appear. Your sleeping mat, a folded tunic, the faint shimmer of a clay vessel in the corner. And just there, beside the hearth, or tucked in a small niche near the door, is the lararium, the household shrine. Imagine it now. It may be a simple shelf or a recess carved into the wall, framed in fading red paint. Inside it, two small statues, your lares, the protective spirits of the home. Often they are shown in dancing poses, holding a drinking horn or a libation bowl. Beside them, perhaps a tiny offering dish, a wreath of dried herbs, a flickering oil lamp that casts golden light up their faces, softening the outlines of their terracotta forms. This is where devotion lives, not in temples of marble, not in the thunder of imperial ceremonies, but here, in the smallest space. The lares protect the boundaries of the home. They watch the door, the hearth, the generations who pass through. They are not feared, they are not bribed, they are thanked. Each morning, many Romans offer them a small prayer, a pinch of salt, a crust of bread, a whispered hope for safety, for health, for peace. Not dramatic things, simply the things needed to live well and to live quietly. You kneel, light the lamp, perhaps murmur the same words your parents once spoke, or simply look at the flames. That is enough. The shrine holds more than gods, it holds memory. Some Romans placed a wax figurine of a deceased parent beside the lares, a way of keeping family near. Others added symbols of their trade. A fisherman might place a small net, a baker a carved loaf. Even in the poorest households, something sacred remained. even if the figures were made of painted clay, even if the shelf was no more than a plank, there was reverence. This is where the day begins, and where it ends. You may not know the names of all the gods, you may not attend every public ritual, but here, in the warm, quiet flicker of the lararium, you are not forgotten, and you do not forget. Outside, the wind moves gently past the window. A neighbor coughs in their sleep. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once, then silence. The lamp flickers lower. The lairs watch, not demanding, not judging, only present. And now you lie down. The mat is thin but familiar. You draw the blanket over your shoulders. You exhale slowly. The room holds stillness. The shrine holds memory. And Rome, vast as it is, pauses, if only for the night. Let the flames burn low. Let the gods rest. Let the city dream. You are safe. You are home. Where the night belonged to the forgotten, the lamps are lit. The city glows now, not with sun, but with flame. From high windows and open courtyards, you hear the soft hiss of oil lamps, the distant clang of shutters being closed for the night. But not every doorway is closing. Down a narrow alley, past a collapsed stall and a crooked archway, you hear something else. A low, pulsing hum of voices, a sudden burst of laughter, the rhythm of dice bouncing on stone. You follow the sound. The sign above the door is crude, painted wood, hanging crookedly from a rusted hook. But this is a popina, a Roman tavern. It doesn't need a name. Everyone nearby knows what it is. You step inside. The room is dim, thick with the haze of oil smoke. A single oil lamp swings gently from a rafter. The walls are stained with soot. The corners dark and cluttered. The smell is complex. Boiled onions, vinegar, smoke, stale wine, wet wool, and ash. It is not unpleasant, just real. Dense, rough benches line the room. The tables are nicked and stained from years of spilled wine and scratched game boards. Hay has been thrown down across the stone floor to soak up spills. It crunches under your feet. Behind the stone counter, the tavern keeper stirs a large clay, a jar embedded in the surface. These sunken dolia hold wine, stew, perhaps chickpeas or lentils in garlic oil. He nods as you enter. No smile, but no suspicion either. You're another face, another customer. You sit. Your cup is chipped, your stool wobbles. No one notices. To your right, a pair of men play tabula, their fingers tapping the wooden board between sips of wine. A third man leans in to watch, whispering, suggestions, or perhaps bets. Their cloaks are worn thin, patched at the elbows, laborers maybe, or off-duty soldiers. Behind you, someone is telling a story, something about a dog that followed a magistrate all the way from Hispania. The details drift, the punchline is lost in laughter. Someone slams a cup down too hard. It cracks. No one stops. This is not the elegant world of marble villas or scented gardens. This is the other Rome, the Rome of the tired, of the slightly drunk, of the unguarded. Here, nobody cares about your lineage. No one asks who your father was or whether you've been to Athens. You are not your toga, you are not your reputation. You are your appetite, your coin, your voice. A woman walks past your table with a jug on her hip. She glances at you, not invitingly, not coldly, just briefly, like a wind brushing past. She speaks with the tavern keeper in a dialect you don't quite catch. They both laugh. Someone sings in the corner. It starts quietly, just a hum. Then it grows. A low, slow tune. A sea shanty, perhaps. Something about a ship and a storm. No one knows all the words. That doesn't matter. The wine is warm, probably watered down, but it's spiced with herbs. Bitter fennel, perhaps, or resin. It hits the back of your throat like memory. You drink, slowly. You listen. You fade into the room. Even in this half light, you begin to notice details. A scratch on the wall shaped like a laurel. A dice roll carved into the wood. A name etched below it. Felix. Someone long ago wanted to be remembered, and outside, the night continues. A cat walks along the edge of the counter, unnoticed. It stops to sniff a scrap of bread before slipping beneath the bench. Rain begins to fall, light at first, then steady. It taps against the wooden shutters. But inside the tavern it doesn't matter. The room is thick with life, with breath, with voices that don't carry far but somehow feel eternal. This is not where laws are written or battles won. But this is Rome too. A Rome of worn sandals and cracked mugs, of old stories half told. A Rome that doesn't shine, but glows. Eventually, you rise. Your knees are a little stiff. Your head a little heavy. You nod to the keeper, leave a coin, and step out into the street. The rain is soft. The cobblestones shine like glass. It's late now. Most of the city has gone to sleep, and you are almost there too. But before you reach your room, there is one more moment in the Roman day, one final gesture. A ritual not for emperors or gods of thunder, but for home. When you're ready, we'll enter the quiet light of the household shrine.